This is Santino Battaglia, and I'll be presenting on Unit 31 of our textbook, Ground Covers. Information presented here is authored by the authors of the book, as shown on the slide, unless otherwise indicated. For an overview of this topic, ground covers are low-growing plants that cover the ground in place of turf. When used functionally, ground covers fill in bare spots in the landscape, help to prevent erosion of soil on steep banks, and fill in shady areas under trees where other plants have difficulty growing. From the chapter and this presentation, the objective to be achieved is to select, establish, and maintain ground covers in the landscape, and the competencies to develop are to identify the three major types of ground covers and three uses, describe the cultural requirements of ground covers, and identify 5 factors to be considered when selecting ground covers. Before we get into specifics, I'll go over key terms and definitions, which are ground covers, low grounding plants that cover the bare soil, decomposed, to break down, erosion, washing/blowing away of the soil by water or strong winds, functionally, a design that is useful, locality, surroundings nearby, perimeter, total distance around the outside of the object, and prostrate, growth pattern of a plant that grows close to the ground. Coming to the first competency for the three major types of ground covers, there are broadleaf evergreens, which are a large needle-like structure low to the ground, which retain leaves year-round. Then there are deciduous evergreens, which are ground covers that lose their leaves in the winter. And then there are narrow-leaf ground covers, which are needle-like evergreens that are prostrate on the ground, have needle/scale-like leaves, and retain color year-round. Next, we'll go over the three uses of ground covers, which are as plants where grass isn't suitable, such as on steep, rocky, shallow, or eroded soils. Ground covers are used for beauty, such as being slow growing and dense, which then make an attractive foreground. And ground covers are used to cool soil and shade roots, which happens when they are placed between broadleaf evergreens. Then here are some pictures of some common used ground covers that are identified in figure 31-2 of the chapter, such as sweet woodruff, golden star, and St. John's wort. For the next objective, we'll now identify some of the cultural requirements of ground covers, which include proper soil, spacing, and watering. And as the book describes, if there's a slope, topsoil should be added and no tilling done. However, if tilling is possible, organic matter should be added in 2 to 5 pounds, and 5-10-5 fertilizer or cottonseed meal spread should be spread evenly over each 100 square foot, and all that matter should be dug into the top 6 inches of the topsoil before planting. For spacing, they should be spaced according to size and growth rate per year, and if you need to cover a steep slope, you should consider planting ground covers more dense and faster growing ground covers to prevent soil erosion, and then watering should be, and then they should be watered well to settle soil around the roots. Going on to the 5 factors to consider when selecting ground covers, there are actually more than 5, but I'll go over them all. Those being type of soil, amount of water, light requirements, suitability for locality, propagation, time until coverage, mature height, disease/insects, and cost. The book then gave some more information about cultural requirements and factors to consider when planting ground cover, such as fertilization, which should be done in the early spring, with dry granules that are watered in, or a soluble fertilizer which is mixed with water, and then no further cultivation needs to be done after they're established. Mulching should also be done, which helps control weeds, and which is better before than after planting, as it's easier to make space in mulch than surrounding a plant after it's in the ground. For pruning, this helps confine ground cover to a desired area, and you can mow around edges slash perimeter to do that. For watering, 1 inch to the entire planting area as needed in the first year should be done, and you'll know if watering is required if the soil is dry or if you see signs of wilting. And lastly, for insects and diseases, you should spray them with recommended pesticides and, of course, wear the proper protective clothing. The chapter then lists some examples of species that can grow in certain conditions. For example, if you need erosion control, you can grow evergreens, and since they keep their stem year round, that'll help hold the soil in place. In a lightly shaded area, you can grow English ivy. In a sunny bank, you can grow prostrate juniper. And for seasonal beauty, you can research species that display seasonal attractiveness. Moreover, the textbook wanted to test your knowledge on identifying which types of plants could grow under certain conditions. So I went back to figure 31-1 and tried to identify which could grow best based on their descriptions and suitability to various environmental conditions. The three conditions the book wanted to test you on were what plants could grow in heavily or lightly shaded areas, sunny banks or hills, and steep banks to control erosion. And some notable ones, which I have pictures for, which are bugleweed, which can be grown in shaded or sunny banks or hills, which is the purple flowering plant on the right. And for a plant that can be grown on a sunny bank or hill or a steep bank to control erosion, is crown vetch, as seen in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide. While the textbook did give actionable cultural recommendations, they didn't give a real-world example of ground covers being implemented, so I thought I'd talk about a personal one, that being in my home garden. I decided to grow I decided to grow some vegetables and I left some plants live instead of hand pulling them all out so I could have a ground cover, which is pictured on the right, known as common purslane. Covering the cultural requirements for this plant, we can see from the table on the left that the plant I chose as a ground cover is a generalist species that appreciates full sun, is non-native, and an overcrowding species that has prostrate growth. I didn't find any insect or disease information, and the cost to implement this was $0 since it was already in the garden. In the context of my garden, I honestly just didn't want to weed as much, cover bare spots, and I heard before that shading the soil could help with moisture retention. Google told me the species that was there was native, and so I kept it, and the soil did seem moist even with only weekly watering. Only now did I find out it was actually an invasive species. Still, though, it followed the establishment pattern of ground covers that were discussed in this chapter so far, and it was functionally useful, and it shows how easy it is to work ground covers into personal landscapes. With that personal example out of the way, we can summarize the chapter. Again, I'll go over the objectives and competencies, which were to select, establish, and maintain ground covers in the landscape. And the competencies were to identify the three major types of ground covers and their uses, describe the cultural requirements of ground covers, and to identify 5 factors to be considered when selecting ground covers. To sum it up quickly, ground covers are low growing, space filling plants. To reach the objective of selecting, establishing, and maintaining ground covers in the landscape, you can refer to my personal example. For ground covers and their uses, there are broadleaf, deciduous, and narrowleaf, and they're used in disturbed environments for their beauty and environmental benefits. And then for cultural requirements and 5 selection factors for ground covers, that should be taken into consideration. There's soil, water, light, site suitability, and spreadability of the ground cover. the time and height of the coverage, any problems they may have, and the cost. Here are the references for my information. Here are the photo citations. And for some additional resources, you can watch a YouTube video on native Midwest ground covers. And for more specifics in planting care and spread information, you can go to University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign's Illinois Extension website. Thank you for watching this presentation.